Hey Scott,
Hey Marty.
how's it going, bud?
All right, how are you?
Pretty good. Ready to get on to our fourth podcast. This is a section, has a longer title that I'm forgetting right now, but it's basically against non-C. And so we're going to be talking about, what that means for this podcast. And it's sort of against a very popular thesis within philosophy, within theology, within the history of religions as well, that there was a necessary stage, at least in Western civilization, from this monotheistic religiosity into the sort of atheistic secularism that we see nowadays. And so there was this transition between needing to mythologize the world and then demythologize the world, basically in the most ridiculously rough terminology here. So that's basically what we're covering in this section today, and how that happened and why that was necessary for some, and ultimately Ziporyn's rejection that that is a necessary move. Because Chinese religions offer so many good counterexamples of not needing to go through this particular type of monotheism, which for Ziporyn is tied up with this idea of a unified intention. And so like we don't need to go through this unified intention in order to get to the sort of like disunity and the purposelessness of purposeless action in Taoism, for example, or intentionless intention in Taoism, and very significantly as well, although it was an imported sort of religious stance in Buddhism, the concept of no self, no unified intention, no unified self, or whatever. So they seem to be able to get to where they're at nowadays without needing to go through monotheism. So ultimately, this will be rejected. But we want to go through this thesis first of all.
Yeah, definitely. I think you were gonna start off kind of leading us about talking about kind of the early Judaism and
Oh yeah,
kind of
sure,
like the
yeah. Yeah, so something that is well known, first of all, in philosophy is sort of Plato and Aristotle to some degree rejection of the gods, the previous polytheism of Greece. So, this is happening around I don't know, the fourth century BC, and there is this idea that we sometimes call demytholo demythologizing rather of human sort of like maybe de-enchant or disenchantment is better word, maybe taking away or getting rid of ascribing intentionality to things that are either scientifically understandable as not having an intention, just like basic causality, Aristotle's four causes or whatever. This is like the beginning of a scientific sort of understanding of cause and scientific understanding of objects and how they, interact with each other and that kind of stuff. So the necessary rejection here would be of the, pantheon of gods that everybody would be familiar with if you ever read like the Iliad or the Odyssey, or and how they interact with human beings. Ziporyn mentions one of nowadays in psychological versions of anthropology or accounting of intentionality within anthropology. How this came to be is, it was adaptive to project intention onto the things in our environment in order for, survival and reproduction, which is kind of like what everything comes down to in I guess you could say behavioral anthropology as well. And so, this is the classic story of animism that, everybody is familiar with, I'm sure, from even whatever kind of like basic history courses you may have taken, where, we used to think, or this is like science history, I guess. We used to think that there were all these independent agencies that were, acting on us. And now we realize that those things may be agental, but they don't have a self. But we used to describe it to gods. And the example that gets used all the time is like the primitive man hears a rustling in the bush, and 99 out of 100 times it's just, the wind rustling the leaves of the tree. But, the one time that it's an actual predator and he has ascribed some intentionality to that wrestling, the primitive man, readies himself, lives very anxiously, but readies himself each of those times, each of those 100 times, for some kind of danger. And so the one time that it happens to be the predator, the primitive man survives. And therefore, he passes down his anxious genes to, his offspring because he's the one who lives, because he has ascribed some intention to those rustling leaves. And so we have this almost like biologically inherited, putting intentionality onto things that, we know scientifically later, once, this demythology, disenchantment or demythologizing, thing happens starting, for us in the West with Plato, starts to happen. We start to, see things as like not having this a gentle kind of like, intention. And then that just, continues to expand. And then in Israel, you have kind of like this match made in heaven, depending on how you think about it, where you have this sort of like um, caused, unmoved mover, this beginning one of all things that just has no personality whatsoever in Greece, so in Athens. So it sounds like this, just totally depersonalized God. You have a sort of analogous thing happening in Jerusalem, and you have, a storm deity, Yahweh, becoming more and more this monotheistic God who's what we call an omni-God. And so the omni-God is it's the ultimate other, where all perfection is put onto this omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibeneficent uh, other that is the cause of all things. Again, it's a sort of depersonalization of God, so that you're taking away like some kind of I don't know, like, well, the way it's put often, you're getting rid of a sky god, you're getting rid of the old dude on a throne, and you're coming into this more impersonal, like, just force of nature almost, and that kind of like comes together to, prepare us for, monotheism, Jerusalem and Athens, and this synthesis that happens, big time in Christianity, but was already happening before Christianity because there was a lot of Greek influence throughout the ancient Near East after Alexander and having set up all the satrapies and whatnot. And so there was this Greek influence that, just wound up getting joined together. And then within Christianity, and Christianity's like earliest thinkers, starting with whoever wrote, the Gospel of John and St. Paul, who were clearly educated in Greek philosophy and Greek language, they kind of like started the synthesis, and then the early church fathers just carried it forward from there. So that God, basically, the move here is God becomes less and less, yeah, this enchanting, capricious force that has its own personality and becomes basically nature, which will eventually get us to Spinoza here. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, and I would say also there's that move to kind of purify the intention, like God's intention, right? Of like will of like wanting the good or
Yeah,
of
nice.
of like the way, in Plato is like the highest good is to like God's will is to will the highest good. And so it's like in order to do that, you need this kind of like remove all the other kind of possible like all the things that can be explained by science, all the things that can be like other like have other explanations in the natural world and be like those are like not part of God's will necessarily. Like God's will is like the good, even if we don't totally understand maybe how that works, with our own will, or maybe we don't understand like the purpose, or I could say, I'd say the ultimate end of that good. But we
It's part
certainly
of
like,
God's otherness is that we don't we like even though things may appear to us to be purposeless, the big other, the ultimate other has a purpose that we just can't know or see or something like that.
right. And so we have this, becoming kind of a purification of this will, of God's will that gets, you know, more and more as like we see kind of rarefied through history, through like as philosophy and religious thought kind of progresses, and this leads to, as we're moving up to non-C here, but first we got to go through Kant, who is like kind of like a major transitional figure in Western philosophy. And what happens in Kant is that Kant takes a lot of the sort of like what we call like laws of the natural world, or like and and actually puts those as like as structures of consciousness, or structure like so or part of like our subjectivity and the way we um perceive the world, but actually like build a world is through a kind of these universal structures that he calls the a priori, like synthetic a priori, which we can would take a lot, not necessarily take a lot to explain, but the basic idea is that they're not given to, it's like the fact that they're synthetic is like that they're not given to us like one equals one. They're not like on their face true, but they're given to us through the natural world as like through our perception. So like we synthesize these truths, um, and that they're universal through a kind of like intuition. And so like an example of that would be the way we perceive time. So it's like we know that in order, like our access to time at any given moment is to whatever is like obviously like directly in front of our face, whatever we're perceiving, right, at any given time. However, we don't experience time that way, right? We experience time as something moving. And the reason we experience time as moving is because we're synthesizing a past, our memories, with like an imagination of the future. And so we're pulling together in our mind the past and the future and our perception of the present, and we're into a experience of time. And so Kant would call that our perception of time as a synthetic a priori.
And a priori here too, and you basically already said this, but it's just that it's necessary for us to experience anything. These are the categories of experience that are necessary for us to even have experience. Without a already existing ability to, synthesize time categorically, we would not be able to see anything. So, like some of the other examples would be like cause and effect. And these are all related categories that are now mostly like brought down to like, let's say four, which are quantity, so like number and all that kind of stuff, one of the many, whatever. And also part of number is like the discrete and the continuous, but also stuff like would be like quality, so like intensities and stuff like that, relational stuff, relationality and modality. These are things we have to come into existence preloaded. Basically, this is what makes our subjective experience possible. That's the ground of possibility for us to have any experience at all, basically. And so. Yeah, it does. But what's important about it is that we're imposing it on whatever is out there, so that we're seeing things according to this what we call like a phenomenological screen. We see phenomenon, we see unified objects in time, all this kind of stuff because we're projecting that, through our subjectivity onto the world. We don't know what the world is in itself. We know it's there. There's no doubt that there is a world in itself, but we don't, whatever it is by itself without our interacting with it, without our relation to it, we don't know. We can only know through this a priori relation that we were pre-programmed with, like our we are hardwired to see the world in cause and effect, in time and space, whatever. Like those things are
And they're
necessary.
right and universal, right? All humans like have this basic structure. It's not something that is contingent and changes throughout time, according to Kant, right? And so the move here is that um, you know, once I would say not accept, but once we have an experience of like how that our subjectivity is actually what creates our reality, that like then that God, that intentionality, that single intentionality will for the good that is driving our experience of reality and I mean is built into ourselves at this point, right? With Kant. So the idea that we need a God somehow outside of that is really like it's no longer necessary. God is a crucial, like just a universal part of our experience. That will of the good, that purposeful, single um, goal of like of consciousness toward goodness.
Yeah, and just to like really quickly add, like, so like part of what Kant was sort of like going against, although he was not like rejecting God or atheism or anything, he wasn't getting into that at all at that time. But it kind of transitions very naturally into that in the way that Scott was talking about. But what somebody like before him had to resort to, like Descartes, with radical skepticism or something. It's like how do I have any guarantee that like things, are the way they are or whatever? It's not from a priori categories or whatever. It's because like God like somehow makes everything cohere and like performs like constant miracles basically to make the world like correlate with, with our perception of it and that kind of stuff. So like yeah, this is a real transition like to a more scientific, I guess we could say, understanding of how, the world appears to us rather than, God having to intervene all the damn time or whatever.
Right. And as we're gonna, discuss the this move of like, I mean, it is an atheism of which is like removing a single purposeful Godhead from the universe outside of ourselves and putting that God within us is essentially a transition into like a secular humanism, right? It's like we no longer we have that monotheistic God becomes part of who we are, becomes like, and those intentions, that intention for the good is something built into the very structure of the way we perceive the world. And so we have a movement then in through this German idealism that Kant kind of like initiated, to like actually find that, like to remove that deity, or like remove that and create this like atheistic um religious religion. However, the problem, that the Ziporyn points out is that we're still stuck with a single purposeful,
Mm.
like, that there is a single purposeful driven like mind, or there's the potential to actually have some kind of perception of the good and what the good is, and the drive and the
Mhm.
will of the good. Um,
And the problem with having such a singleness of purpose, it's kind of like in the previous chapters when we talked about like let's take Hitchens for example. His idea, like what was the problem with religion was that it was like it enabled you to do all kinds of horrible things. Why? Because you believe in an ultimate intention because you believe that you can, know the good ultimately and that you can enforce it. And you get a justification of enforcing, your perception of what the good is because you think that, it's necessary, and that, whatever you do in, to that end is justified then. And so that's the part of religion that Ziporyn wants to get rid of is it's not that intentions and purposes can't arise. It's just that not one of them can overrule the rest. And so that if science then just emerges, as we talked about in one of the other episodes, as the new big other, as the new intention to rule it all, because it's the ultimate way of deciding things, then again, you get the same, reproduction of violence. I mean, as you can see in sort of a weird way, when like, Darwinism becomes Malthusian and becomes like this master race kind of stuff that you get in Germany. That's from, a kind of like pseudoscience, admittedly, but like a sort of like understanding that like, hey, evolution has this ultimate intention, this ultimate goal, and it's to like create this master race, this like ultimate like being or whatever, and like we've got to like intervene and help it along by like ridding it of the other intentionalities that have anything beyond this economic sort of like purity, transactionability kind of an idea that go along
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah, and I mean it's also, I mean, another point that I think that which Ziporyn makes, which is really excellent, and is like actually like our perception of any mind that we know and have access to. None of none of those minds can we find a pure intention or like an actually like a clear division between like there's like what loving and a loving intention is and what a like a hating intention is. Like there's the our intentions are always conflicted. They're always, preliminary, and we actually like don't have access to them ourselves. um
Hmm.
I mean, and this is something we see like in romantic love, very often, for example, like we, you know, maybe like in the experience of falling in love, we like lose ourselves in that. It can be like an incredibly like joyous experience, but at the same time, like just anxiety invoking and makes like you just because of the loss of control, like and like the mix of emotions and the mix of intentions that you like lose access to kind of yourself and like your love of yourself and your own goals. So it's just like there's always a mixture, I guess you would say, and there's always contradictions in any
And
mind that we
multiplicity.
know. Right.
There's always multiple. This is the basic psychoanalytic point that, we are not a unified self. I mean, this is like basically how Buddhists, show us that we don't have like a eternally, one self or anything like that, that they're just aggregations of various sorts of, impulses and intentions and, whatever we call our personality and all, and our memories or whatever things, whatever you can think of that would like unify a person as a one, into like, so like, and this you can see how this mirrors the sort of like depersonalization of gods, especially like, and then it makes them, have this sort of like ultimate one intention. It's just this very unnatural move. That's not who we are.
Yeah.
We are not like that at all. I'll just you give two, Freudian examples that are famous, and they're both, I guess, somewhat sexist. But like the overbearing mother. So our love for even somebody as close to us as our mother. I mean, even think about in my own situation. My mother had severe postpartum depression, and of course, it's a chemical thing, and we can medically understand it. But to some degree, it's also this ambivalent feeling of the mother towards the kid, which mirrors the ambivalent feeling of the kid towards the mother. Whereas, in Freudian thought, the smothering mother is, this overbearing mom that you can't, that is too much. And then
Right.
also in Freudian mythology, psychology, you have the horde father who, the children have to overcome, and even in, Freud's myth, have to kill the father in order to, get access to like the goods of society because the father's hoarding all the goods, including the women and whatever. But they, carry this ambivalent feeling towards the father. They have great admiration for his prowess and his dominance, but they also have this great hatred for the fact that he's controlling everything. And then they've
Yeah.
carried after the murder, the mythological murder, they carry this guilt with them, for the rest of their life, which is for Freud the foundation of society and its discontents. So, anyways, yeah.
Yes. I mean, maybe a less sexist way of thinking
Yeah.
about this too is like
Save me,
that.
Scott.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think about, anytime there's a relationship of dependence. So we, anytime we depend on someone, be that our parents when we're kids or our spouse when we get older, um, we feel ambivalence toward them. We can feel resentful of the fact that we do depend on them and feel like that we can actually like hate ourselves for being so dependent. I think that's just like a very natural feeling that can get in the way of us being present to that person that we like most like deeply care about, like our partner or whatever, who we cast in, these roles because, or we can cast in our kind of parent roles, even though like we don't want to, like when we are dependent on someone, it certainly goes back to our childhood, and that those early years when we were dependent on our parents and we didn't have a choice in it. um
So
so
Ziporyn makes a really good, and it's, really difficult for I would imagine a lot of us to swallow like idea like moving religious experience away from an experience of an ultimate purpose. So like the way Paul Tillich would say it, and actually Ziporyn challenges, which is like of ultimate concern, moving it away from some sort of ultimacy in that regard towards ambiguity itself. And so he offers the figure of Levinas as a sort of like gesture towards that direction where, Levinas's appreciation of the other is the unknowability of the other. And the psychoanalytical point that Scott was just making is that we're unknowable to ourselves as well. And Ziporyn is saying like, and this is a religious experience that we this unknowability, this irreducible ambiguity, this unidentifiability, this lack of a name is also a religious experience. So much of religion is about finding the correct name. And why in demonology or in anything else do, in religious history, do folks want to know the name of the thing, the name of the demon, or whatever, for control? And so what Ziporyn is saying is that lack of control is also a religious experience, and it's for him, and I think for Scott and I too, the primary religious experience. That is when we are, with the divine. And if we have this other, preference for control, we really are losing most of what makes religion and the experience of the divine, the experience of the sacred, desirable or worth anything. You know what I mean? But it's hard to
yeah.
desire that. It's hard to desire a lack of control, which is why Ziporyn, finds it in Chinese religion, and especially in Taoism. So.
And right, in order to find ourselves in like control or out of control, it's like we have to be willing to put ourselves in situations where that might happen, and take risks, which is hard to do, especially as we get older. But hopefully we can and we will like try to live in that and experience life deeply and mystical experience.
Yeah, a mystical experience is either a horror show or the most deeply sublime and beautiful thing you can have. And that's that's a part of the ambiguity of it because it often does feel like when you're not in control, when your self is not is like is like falling apart and it's not, working, there are a lot of detrimental things. You can't live in that state. And Ziporyn is not suggesting that either. But like, there is a certain necessity to it, and it's at least a part, for us, the most important part of our lives. Again, it's not to like say no purpose, no nothing. Like it's just to say like when we get stuck in a purpose, that's a nightmare. That's a horror. And so it takes another horror
Break it open and
to break it open. Yeah, it's I mean the religious experience of having something that you thought was essential to you, um, you know, fall apart and like whatever, something that you thought was solid, like like open up under your feet, which is like kind of like what the experience of horror, maybe in a more positive way, the sublime, but the sublime can be totally horrible because it's just like this radical indeterminacy opens up this this vastness. That's what the sublime is. You're standing on this precipice and there's just too much possibility. But the experience of being stuck in a repetition of the same, that is the
yes.
true nightmare. Like that is
Right.
what religious experience is supposed to break open.
Yeah, and I think, it's hard to really, until we all experience it in different ways, right? And I mean, I can just say from my own experiences, just that getting a chance to experience like life again in a new way, like through like a death of a sort, through something of your old self dying and like or your old relationship that's like needed to transform. Sometimes that requires just a radical breaking open through um through openness to this unknowable of intentionless void, I guess, like for lack of a better word. We'll just leave it there.
Yeah, and that's who we're going to be getting into next time in this next section about uber piety. Mainly our good friend Nietzsche, because he, had this, for us Westerners, let's just say, this great relationship with the void. So that, he wanted to stare into it, stand next to it, like, be close to it, keep it close, and acknowledge that it's in us. Why? Because it is this purposeless ground. It is this groundless ground that we sometimes talk about in theology. But like it is this terror and this wellspring of everything that is. This is where we come from. So,
Yes.
this is what we are. And for me, and I think for Scott too, that's what love is. Like it sounds so crazy to say, but like that love is this open indeterminacy, this gift that we give to each other, that allows each other to become, through indeterminacy, through the void. And
Yeah.
so,
And it's
that's why we're
yeah,
doing this together.
for sure. Yeah, and it's intentionless. I mean, it's not, or it lacks clear intention, I guess is
Right.
maybe a way to
It
say
just, I
it's
mean,
not, it's a mess. It's like,
absolutely. Because if it has a clear intention, this is the thing that, this is one of Zizek's most famous points. If you can say why you love somebody, if you can say what it's for, it's not love.
yeah. All right. Well, I think we made it through another one.
All right.
So we'll move on to the next.
Yeah, let's talk about atheism as uber piety next. And our good friend Friedrich Nietzsche will be the star. So we're excited.
All right. Awesome. Talk to you later.
All right. All right. Talk to you later.